Despite his shortcomings, he was a good guy who wished to share them with the world. He simply has these ailments. Phil Robertson didn't simply leave the limelight, but it doesn't seem like he's getting it. With conviction in his bones and grit on his boots, he established an empire. However, there is a last twist to his story that lies beneath the headlines, the beard, and the camouflage. Even those closest to him were taken aback by it. His passing in 2025 marked more than just the close of a phase. It revealed something that was more devastating to his family than anyone could have predicted. What exactly did he leave behind, and why did they grieve over it? This ending isn't what you expected, so stay with us. The origins of a rough upbringing. Phil Robertson's early years were characterized by survival and adversity rather than comfort or luxury. He was the fifth of 7 children born into a household that was far below the poverty level in the little Louisiana town of Vivian. They lived in a basic wooden cabin in Caddo Parish with no indoor plumbing, no electricity, and little protection from the humid southern weather. Every day was a struggle to make ends meet for the Robertsons. For Phil, these circumstances were the only life he had ever known, even though others might find them intolerable. He learned that success wasn't something you inherited from this background, which also strengthened his resilience. Hunting, earning, and defending it were all necessary. Without the comforts of contemporary life, Phil discovered that the natural world was abundant. His school was the woods and wetlands of northwest Louisiana. He was assisting his siblings in tracking wildlife and catching fish as soon as he was able to walk. Hunting was not a hobby. It was essential. He had simple tools, an instinct sharpened by continuous exposure to the woods, a borrowed .22 rifle, and a handcrafted fishing pole. Whether it was pursuing a deer through the forests or cleaning a squirrel for dinner, Phil's early years were filled with lessons about independence. These abilities would serve as the cornerstone of his future empire in addition to providing for his family. James and Merritt Robertson, Phil's parents, put up a lot of effort to support the family. To make ends meet, James worked in the oil fields and, as a sharecropper, Merritt cooked wild greens, fried fish, and squirrel stew, using whatever ingredients she could locate to make meals that satisfied 9 mouths. There was no waste. Phil was given a strong example of strength and dedication by seeing his parents endure despite ongoing hardship. There were no shortcuts or handouts, just what you could catch, cultivate, or make on your own. He carried these principles into maturity. School was a whole other story. Phil was never really accepted. Tracking ducks was more meaningful to him than figuring out mathematical calculations. Not that he was not intelligent. He just had no interest in what conventional schooling had to offer. Phil's heart stayed in the swamp as other students were ready for jobs in towns and cities. In retrospect, it's hardly remarkable that he would go on to make a multi-million-dollar business out of his expertise in outdoor living and duck calls. Character was developed in Louisiana's swamp, muck, and trees, rather than taught in classrooms during those early, unpolished years. During Phil's early years, even leisure had a purpose. He rarely had free time, and when he did, it was usually to do more work, such carrying water, chopping firewood, or assisting his father in fixing old hunting equipment and tools. Although it wasn't play in the traditional sense, Phil learned to feel good about helping others. His closest friends were brothers who experienced the same hardships as him and wild animals rather than classmates. He learned the rhythms of the woods, where deer tracks indicated new game, when the ducks moved, and when the fish bit. These weren't pastimes. They began as survival skills and developed into business instincts. For Phil, the demands of nature provided discipline rather than a coach or a classroom. Phil's perseverance was put to the test in a different, unexpected arena, under stadium lights, just when it appeared that the swamp had completely molded his fate. A QB star who left, Phil Robertson's modest upbringing contrasted sharply with his athletic prowess. His success in Louisiana high school football earned him a starting quarterback position at Louisiana Tech University in 1964. Above all, he was a player before Terry Bradshaw, who would later be inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame and win 4 Super Bowl rings. Scouts and coaches were immediately impressed by Phil's natural leadership on the field and his powerful arm. There was substantial interest from the NFL. He might have worn a professional jersey in an other life, But he didn't want to follow that route. For Phil, football was always just a game. End. Life was hunting. Phil saw limitations, but others saw gold signs and the promise of stardom. He didn't like the routine, discipline, and publicity that accompanied a football career. He cherished independence, spending time outside, and leading a natural lifestyle. During duck season, even at Louisiana Tech, he would miss class or practice to go hunting. This was not an act of rebellion. It reflected his true sense of fulfillment. Despite the fact that many people at the time questioned his decision to leave football, he later claimed that he never regretted it. His decision, which would later influence his autonomous career path in business and media, demonstrated an early rejection of traditional norms. Following his departure from football, Phil obtained a bachelor's and master's degree in education. He briefly experimented with teaching and coaching at a high school, probably to support his expanding family and maintain a connection to football. It didn't last, though. It didn't last. His heart wasn't in the classroom, and the rules were too strict. Phil was obviously not wired for traditional professional choices. He was restless and looking for a career that aligned with his principles and identity. He would ultimately return to the forest as a result of his search, where he would discover meaning and tranquility. While many may find Phil's decision to forego a possible NFL career incomprehensible, it was a clear move for him. He knew what gave him a sense of life. Looking back, that choice hinted at all that came after. Phil established his life on his own convictions rather than what the public expected of him. Whether it was creating Duck Commander or becoming the face of a cultural movement through Duck Dynasty, his decision to leave football wasn't a setback. It was a move in the direction of genuineness. The brink, the bottle, the bar, and the dark decade. The darkest years of Phil Robertson's life were the 1970s, a period characterized by bad choices, excessive drinking, and rising instability. Phil left athletics and a brief stint as a teacher to take over a gritty pub in Arkansas that was more known for fights than beer sales. With little structure and even less stability, he turned the wagon wheel. As much as the drink, the mayhem was what drew customers. And that vigor was matched by Phil's escalating whiskey addiction and short fuse. What began as a way to earn a living soon devolved into a disastrous way of life that further distanced him from the principles he had been taught as a child. Alcohol quickly took center stage in his life. Phil wasn't the only one impacted. It caused all around him to become unstable. He left his wife Kay and their young sons to fend for themselves because he was always away from home, arriving either late or not at all. His family started to worry and be disappointed because of his unpredictable behavior. Family members and friends remember times when Phil was seldom there, missing on an emotional and spiritual level, but physically present. This was no short-term diversion. Over the course of several years, Phil began to neglect his responsibilities and distance himself from those who most needed him. His act of self-destruction peaked after a violent altercation at a bar that got out of hand, and even Phil couldn't handle. In order to escape legal repercussions, he retreated into the Louisiana woods after rendering a victim comatose. He was an outlaw in his own village and lived off the grid for a while, surviving on fishing and hunting. Later on, he acknowledged that he was evading more than just the law. He was avoiding God, his family, and responsibility. His behavior didn't change right away, but the time alone allowed him to think. It was a low period that almost lost him everything, both personally and morally. Phil's relationship with his family was in ruins by the late 1970s. The difference between Phil's current self and his previous self had never been greater, and Kay was raising 4 boys by herself. His sons, who were too little to properly comprehend, were growing up in an unstable household. Although this period of Phil's life is rarely exalted, it was crucial to the plot that developed. His ultimate metamorphosis was based on the suffering he inflicted and then faced. Failure may have characterized this chapter, but it also made clear the extent of the transformation he would have to undergo in order to take back his life and rebuild his family. Kay's affection and the force of salvation. Phil Robertson's family was suffering as his life began to fall apart by the middle of the 1970s. Kay, his wife Robertson, had put up with his increasing instability since 1966, raising 4 young boys in a home that was becoming more and more characterized by absenteeism, fear, and broken promises. Kay maintained her composure at home, while Phil's barroom lifestyle descended into even greater disarray, but she was only so patient. She finally lost it in 1975 and gave a straightforward command. She would take the kids and go, or Phil would change. She wasn't threatening. Desperation gave rise to them, a last appeal for the man she had known to come back. Love was the source of Kay's resolution. But there was a risk involved. At that moment, Phil had no clear direction and little accountability. Nevertheless, her remarks touched a nerve. It was the start of something new. Shortly afterward, Phil met Bill Smith, a local preacher. Smith's televangelism was not polished. He was a straightforward speaker who was familiar with the swamp and its inhabitants. He sat down with Phil to confront him rather than to condemn him. Give up running in punta. Admit your transgressions and acknowledge that God had a greater plan. It was a dialogue that penetrated Phil's barriers. Phil made a public choice later that year that would signal the beginning of his metamorphosis. His baptism in a muddy Louisiana river at the age of 28 served as a spiritual and symbolic purification in the same waters where he had spent his childhood fishing. This was not a temporary solution. The battle that ensued would subsequently rank among the most difficult in Phil's life. Giving up alcohol completely, mending relationships, and acknowledging the harm he had caused. However, it was also the point at which salvation was feasible. With Kay by his side and faith as his new compass, Phil started to rebuild his life back together. With a purpose this time. Kay's choice to stick behind Phil, forgive him, and start over shows how strong her character is and how much she believes in second chances. She saw the man buried beneath years of failure when others might have turned away. Everything that followed, from a re-established family to a multinational corporate empire, was made possible by her love and Phil's newly discovered faith. There wouldn't be a Duck Commander, Duck Dynasty, or legacy without this pivotal moment. Kay's demand and Phil's answer were crucial in preserving not only their union, but also the Robertson family's future, making a company out of gravel and cedar. In 1972, Phil Robertson sowed the roots of his economic success in a modest backyard shed in Louisiana rather than a boardroom. Phil made his own duck calls after becoming dissatisfied with the quality of store-bought ones. The mass-produced models, in his opinion, sounded unnatural and had nothing in common with the birds he had spent his whole life studying. He started hand-carving duck calls out of blocks of cedar, tweaking each one until it could fool a wild duck. Motivated by his in-depth knowledge of waterfowl and his meticulous nature, this was no pastime. It was a need-driven fixation that was honed by experience. He formally established Duck Commander, a one-man show at first, that same year. Kay ran the home and assisted with bookkeeping, while Phil took on side activities, such as commercial fishing, to help fund the new company, too. On the kitchen table, their sons, who were still young at the time, helped out by packing calls. Because it was the only choice they could afford, the entire process was kept in the family, not because it was trendy. Initially, sales were slight. Offering his duck calls for Willie Robertson, who had studied business, concentrated on growing the brand's reach, while Jace Robertson, who paid close attention to both sound and function, improved the duck call designs. Willie started advocating for better packaging, wider retail distribution, and larger-scale production because he recognized potential that went well beyond localized sales. He oversaw the updating of Duck Commander's branding to appeal to a wider national audience while preserving the authenticity that initially made it so famous. There was a significant change with that push toward professionalization. From packing kitchen tables, the business branched out into commercial production and shipping. Across the nation, calls started to show up in sporting goods stores like Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, and eventually, Walmart. The family firm, which had started out small, was now a participant in the outdoor retail industry. However, despite its financial success, the business never lost sight of its origins. The family remained involved in every facet of the business, putting the faces and story behind the goods front and center. Consumers were purchasing more than just duck calls. They were adopting a philosophy and way of life. The foundation for the media coverage that would ultimately propel the Robertsons into the mainstream was also established during this time of development. Phil had inadvertently demonstrated that his magnetism worked on camera in his early videos. Together with their unique personalities and expanding business, the family had the foundation for something far larger. Duck Commander was already a well-known brand across the country before any network partnerships or reality series were made. It was now obvious that this was more than a family enterprise. It was a movement that combined values, media, and products under a single, identifiable name: primetime redneck royalty. Phil Robertson was dubious when A&E proposed a reality TV show to the Robertson family in the early 2010s. He was much more at ease in a duck blind than on a soundstage, and he had little use for cameras or producers. But Willie, his son, recognized a chance. Willie thought a reality show might spread their faith, humor, and way of life to a wider audience because the family business was already flourishing and their tale was based on authenticity. The family finally consented after much deliberation, and Duck Dynasty debuted on March 21, 2012. They had no idea what was going to happen next. The show became popular right away. The captivating blend of family-oriented tales, Christian values, and rustic humor drew many viewers. The patriarch Phil soon emerged as the focal point of the program. In a television environment that was becoming more and more centered on polished individuals, his distinctive beard, unvarnished wisdom, and traditional viewpoints stood out. His catchphrases, such as "happy, happy," and "if it ain't in the Bible, I don't need it," were ingrained in popular culture. Duck Dynasty's greatest strength was its genuineness, which separated it apart from scripted television. One of the most popular reality shows in cable history, the show attracted 11.8 million viewers at its height. The success of Duck Dynasty went well beyond ratings. It served as the foundation for a massive product business that made the Robertsons well-known. Duck Commander goods filled store shelves, ranging from calendars and books to board games and camouflage. The brand was being purchased by the fans in addition to being seen. A cultural identity based on faith, family, and modest living was embodied by Phil and the family. But Phil started to stand on the message rather than the cash. He publicly shared his values with groups he believed were underrepresented in mainstream media, using it to further his cause. However, Phil remained self-sufficient throughout. If he thought the show was scripted or felt controlled, he would frequently argue with the producers. The essence of the show was centered on Phil's refusal to compromise, as one director remembered when he left a shot midway to go fishing, remarking, "Y'all got enough. Gal got enough." It simply couldn't work without Phil being Phil. Over the course of its 11 seasons and 130 episodes, Duck Dynasty became a cultural icon for millions of people. It was more than just a TV program. It served as a platform for Robertsons to spread their beliefs and served as evidence of how an unfiltered voice from the swamps of Louisiana could have a significant influence on American popular culture. The 2013 conflagration, celebrity versus religion. Phil Robertson was at the focus of a national media frenzy in December 2013. When asked about his opinions on sin and morality in an interview with GQ magazine, he gave direct, biblical insight. He cited scripture to support his condemnation of homosexuality and other actions he believed to be wicked. Robertson clarified that his opinions were based on his Christian beliefs, but the public's response was swift and divisive. The network that broadcast Duck Dynasty, A&E, quickly responded by suspending Phil from the program due to the harsh nature of his remarks. Although there was a huge backlash, it was not what many media experts had anticipated. Suspension inspired a sizable portion of Phil's fan base rather than hurting his reputation. Conservative pundits presented the episode as an assault on free speech and Christian principles, and hashtags such as #StandWithPhil were popular on social media. Politicians, religious groups, and viewers who viewed the suspension as an instance of cultural overreach all poured in their support. Phil was more than simply a reality TV personality to many. He had turned into a spokesperson for people who believed that their opinions were becoming less and less acceptable in society. Within 9 days, A&E changed its mind and brought Phil Robertson back to the program. The network's reversal, of course, addressed an economic reality in addition to demonstrating the strength of public support. One of its most lucrative franchises was Duck Dynasty. But even while the controversy was upsetting, it only helped the show's visibility. Ready. Once a marketing risk, Phil's unaltered demeanor today contributes significantly to his appeal, but it was a watershed moment. The show continued to air for a few more seasons, but the Robertson name was increasingly associated with its stance on cultural and religious issues rather than its brand or humor. Phil never apologized. He relied on the argument of, "I was just quoting the Bible," and love for others, even those he disagreed with, in the interviews that followed. His followers saw this remark as more evidence of his sincerity. It brought to light the growing cultural divide in America. According to his critics, whichever side you choose, it made no difference. Phil Robertson's reputation as more than just a reality TV star would be permanently damaged by the 2013 issue. He had come to represent faith, rural conservatism, and the struggle for free speech in contemporary America. A life away from the spotlight. Following the conclusion of Duck Dynasty in 2017, Phil Robertson distanced himself from the media. He did not, however, vanish. Although he delegated Duck Commander's daily management to his sons Willie and Jace, Phil continued to play a significant role in determining the family's morals and spiritual compass. He changed from being a well-known reality TV personality to a more specialized evangelist and cultural analyst. He could now express his opinions without a camera crew. His voice was given more control and fewer filters on a new platform. The next stage of Phil's life focused on the Unabashed podcast that he and his boys co-hosted. Phil was able to openly discuss theology, politics, culture, and personal development on the show, frequently using scripture and lessons learned from his own life. In contrast to television, the podcast facilitated extended conversations, allowing listeners to gain a more profound comprehension of his beliefs. Unashamed gained thousands of devoted fans and served as a platform to spread the Robertson message beyond duck calls and souvenirs. This wasn't about Phil clinging to his celebrity. It was about guiding people toward what he thought was the truth by leveraging his position. In the past, Phil's legacy from television also included books. Among his works were Jesus Politics, The Theft of America's Soul, and Happy. They expanded his perspective and changed him from a fighter to a devout follower. Such a disgrace to many of Phil's transformations in the world's sight. He developed into the man who spoke out against all obstacles and was not easily intimidated by the mainstream. One could only conclude that, despite all the criticisms of his views, his notoriety in conservative Christian circles was undeniable. His writing provided his followers with more than just amusement. It also gave them a tradition-based philosophy based on scriptural interpretation. Even though Phil was no longer in the public eye, he did not go into retirement. He frequently appeared in the family's expanding media measure. Whether he was speaking at church or hunting with the grandchildren, Phil kept in touch with the way of life of a straightforward, religious family. Beyond that, Phil had evolved into a spiritual patriarch rather than just a businessman or TV personality. He made sure that the Robertson name would signify more than duck calls by handing over operational leadership of the family firm to the next generation, while still providing them with moral guidance and a sense of purpose, faith, perseverance, and legacy. Background, something significant was subtly developing until the last moment, something no one was prepared for, even as Phil's voice became softer in public, transferring the flame and unwavering faith. Phil Robertson fought a hard struggle with Alzheimer's and related health issues before dying in May 2025 at the age of 79. His passing signaled the conclusion of a remarkable life that had progressed from chaos to redemption, from rural poverty to national fame. Even though his loved ones had been expecting the news of his death because of his deteriorating health, it nonetheless caused a national emotional uproar. In addition to mourning the man, his family, friends, and devoted supporters also lamented what he stood for: a strong voice anchored in faith, family, and fortitude. Willie and Corey Robertson made the formal news in a statement that emphasized Phil's steadfast devotion to God throughout his last days. They characterized him as a man who bravely and spiritually confronted life and death. In his last months, Phil was still able to communicate openly about his faith in God's plan and to express appreciation, according to his family. There was tranquility instead of terror. They claimed that his last moments aligned with his lifestyle since his metamorphosis decades prior. Steadfast in his beliefs, encircled by family, and rooted in the principles he advocated. Part of the reason for Phil Robertson's passing has been speculation around his $10 million family estate, which seems insignificant in light of the vast media and retail empire they have built. Where Phil stood, or more crucially, sat, was not in the realm of material achievement, but anyone who knew Phil well or comprehended any aspect of his journey could tell. His priorities were cultural, familial, spiritual, and legacy. He abandoned a family in order to carry on sharing his message. Duck Commander is led by Willie and Jace with the same authenticity and roughness. After Phil passed away, tributes poured in from both fans and religious leaders, as well as critics who recognized the profoundly influential culture he created. Despite this, the Unabashed podcast continues to be a popular forum for expressing personal views and biblical lessons. Some even conjectured as to whether studios might be interested in turning his story, which details his transformation and actions, into a film or documentary. Although the future of these possibilities is yet uncertain, it is evident that the Robertson family intends to keep it alive. They uphold the principles he lived by means of ongoing ministry, business, and public service. To put it briefly, Jesus left us a framework to live by, not by luck, but by conviction, purpose, and unwavering trust. Thank you for viewing. Please hit the like button, leave a comment with your ideas, and remember to subscribe for more in-depth analyses like this one if Phil Robertson's tale touched you. Don't stop here too. To continue the tale, click the next video that appears on your screen.